All right, today we are on the next 2 pages, Module 6, Lesson 5. Today we're going to start introducing those hundredths into our decimals. So the title of today's lesson is Decimals, Tenths, and Hundredths. Pause if you need to fill in more. Otherwise, we'll get going. All right, today's objective is I can decompose, which means I can break down a decimal into its tenths and hundredths. Now, before we dive into this, let's take a look and revisit what a hundredth represents. I can decompose tenths into hundredths by multiplying by 10. Hundredths are smaller than tenths. Now there's actually a typo on your notes today, so I want to fix that with you right now. Instead of saying multiplying by 10, what we mean to say is multiplying by tenths, by breaking it down into smaller units. That's how we can change a 1/10 into a 100th. Let's think of it like a dollar. If one whole was $1, 100 cents, a 10 would be a lot like, what do you think? A daddy quarter worth 25 cents? Probably not, because if we have 100 cents, we can't fit 10 daddy quarters into that dollar. That'd be much more than 100 cents. Would it be more like baby penny? Worth 1 cent? Again, no, we need a whole lot more than 10 pennies to make an entire dollar. Oh, what about Johnny Nickel? Brother nickel, worth 5 cents. 10 nickels would be 50 cents, half a dollar, not quite. If we think of a whole group as a dollar, our mommy dime with 2 hairs on her head would be like our 10th unit, because we need 10 tenths to make a dollar, 10 tenths to make a whole, just like we need 10 dimes to make a dollar. That would mean that a 100th would be like what? If we broke down our dime into even smaller units, broke it down and decomposed it into tenths, that would be like our baby penny. We need 100 hundredths to make one whole, and we need 100 pennies to make a dollar. Now that we've refreshed our memory on hundredths, let's take a look at our notes today. It says, use both tenths and hundredths place value discs to represent each number. Write the equivalent number in decimal, fraction, and unit form. So first we have 3 hundredths. I'm going to start by drawing my discs. I need 3 of them. And since they're hundredths discs, when I put my hundredth in it, I'm going to put the number 0 for 0 whole groups. Not enough to make a tenth, so I have 0 tenths. And then I'll write the number 1 to show my 100th. I'm going to do that 3 times since I have 3 of them. My 3 hundredths would be the same as writing 0 and 0 tenths and 3 hundredths. 3 hundredths in total. Let's do that again. This time, let's show it with 15 hundredths. Last time we only had to draw 3 discs. This time we're going to draw 15 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, new row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, new row. I really want a lot of room down at the bottom here, so I'm going to make my next row up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I now have I now have 15 hundredths. I'm going to take a moment to fill in my hundredths. Pause the video if you need to do the same thing, and fill in each of your discs. So they say 0.01. So now that I have 15 hundredths, my question is, can I compose any of those into a tenth? Let's think back to our coins here. These are dimes, these are pennies. How many pennies would we need to have the same value as a dime? How many hundredths would we need to have the same value as a tenth? I can circle up a group of 10 hundredths, like these 10 right here, and I can compose them together into 1/10. Do I have enough hundredths to do that again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't. I have to stop there. I can only do it one time. But now instead of saying 15 hundredths, I can say that I have 1/10 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hundredths. Let's represent this as a decimal. 15 hundredths was the same as having 1/10 and 5 hundredths, or just simply writing the number 15 after the decimal point. Whether I have 15 pennies or if I have 1 dime and 5 pennies, I have 15 cents either way. The same goes for this decimal. Whether I have 15 hundredths or 1/10 and 5 hundredths, I still have 0.15 as my decimal, which is the same as 1/10 and 5 hundredths. So let's practice this 4 more times. First, let's show 72 hundredths. I can tell that this is 72 hundredths because after the decimal point, I see the number 72. What I've learned on the last page, though, is that if I have tens of hundredths, this number right here, this 7, actually tells me how many tenths I have. 72 hundredths would be the same as saying I have 7 tenths and 2 hundredths. So instead of wasting my time drawing 72 discs that represent our 72 hundredths, I can instead just draw 7 tenths discs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 2 hundredths discs. 1, 2. I want to be sure to label them so I can tell the difference between the values of these 2 different types of discs I have. Oops. Let's practice again. So now we have 80 hundredths. But I notice that it's only labeled as tenths, not hundredths. Well, I'm going to rewrite this as hundredths. I have 80 hundredths. Just like the last time, if I look at how many tens of hundredths I have, that's how many tenths I have. 8 tenths is the same value as 80 hundredths. It's like saying 8 dimes is the same value as 80 pennies. So instead of drawing 80 hundredths, let's just draw 8 tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, new row. 1, 2, 3. And I'll label them all as tenths. This time I don't have a fraction, I don't have a decimal. all I have is 7/10 and 2/100. 7/10 and 2/100. 7 dimes and 2 pennies. Well, that's the same as saying 72 hundredths. So let's represent that as a decimal. 72 hundredths. 72 hundredths. But instead of drawing all 72 hundredths, we can just do 7/10 and 2/100. You know, as I'm doing this feels familiar to me. Are you noticing that too? Huh. You may have noticed that this problem and this problem, though represented differently, show the same amount. 7/10 and 2/100, 72 hundredths. We have the same fraction, the same decimal, the same drawings. So I have a hunch that when we get to D and F, we're also going to be seeing some similarities as well. 80 hundredths, just like we had up here, is the same as having 8/10. If we have 0 and 8/10, I'm actually just going to leave it as this decimal here. That's the same as saying 0.80. They're the same decimal. So that also means 8/10 is the same exact fraction as 8. Sorry, had a little mistake there when I wrote as 80 hundredths. 8/10, 80 hundredths, 0.80, 0.8, same fraction, same units, same discs, same unit form. So again, I can represent 8/10 using 8/10 discs. And that would be the same as having 80 hundredths. On your problem set, see how else you can relate tenths to hundredths.